Hebrews 11. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice. Verse 8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go to a place. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. All of these things, they're not thoughts. They're not feelings, but they're actions. And so Hebrews 11 isn't really describing how people are thinking. It's describing how people live and how they make choices. And most of these choices are made when they're in distress. This faith in Hebrews 11 is going to be linked to endurance. It's linked to hope. Faith begins by engaging our minds. But it doesn't end there. It doesn't just end with a thought. It begins with it, but it results with a radical action and commitment because of what God has done. So, biblical faith starts with our minds, but it ends at and results with this radical action that is going to happen. So Hebrews 11:1, this is the King James Version, which most of us are going to have like NLT or NIV or ESV. But I like this because faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And this makes faith tangible. In other words, here faith is not just an inner feeling. It's going to be substance. There's going to be evidence of it. So when you experience faith, the faith that it is an experience you have when you obey and follow Jesus in a way that makes no sense in light of your present surroundings. So most of the time, this kind of faith isn't going to make sense when you look at our lives right now, because we're looking forward. And this is why. So faith begins with a mindset. It's going to end with this radical action. And it's going to show that I believe God is going to do what he says he will do. And in Hebrews 11, that's what all of these people are doing. There's an action because they believe that God is going to do what he says. Faith is not just a religious experience. It was built on a series of facts. It's also not the absence of thinking things through. It's not going to be a blind following. I have this thing when I drive in my car, and I realized when I did it this morning when I was driving with Morgan, I call it, do not do this, it's called the go no matter what maneuver. And it's where you're like possibly coming up to a yellow light, but you can't really stop, so you go no matter what. And it's kind of dumb. Like, it's pretty stupid. If you're going to blindly drive your car through a possible red light, then you're at risk of bad things happening to you. And that's really what happens if we're going to blindly follow something. So, Hebrews 11, 24 through 28. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. It was by faith that Moses commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover and to sprinkle the blood on the doorpost so that the angel of death would not kill their firstborn sons. All of these things are very active. When you think about stepping out in faith, if you're sliding off a cliff and you reach out and you grab a branch, the first thought that you're thinking is not going to be, I hope my arm is strong enough. No, you're thinking, I hope the branch is strong enough. I hope the branch can hold me. What matters is the strength of the thing that you're holding on to. And the gospel makes claims about the world that we live in, about events that have taken place that have changed, and had cosmic significance. And we can't ignore that. The power of faith in Hebrews 11 begins with engaging your mind, but it called them to obeying by faith, to living with a radical action that's going to show that they're believing what God is going to do, that he's going to do what he says he's going to do. And Hebrews 11:26, which was right in the middle of this right here, said, he, Moses, thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own treasures of Egypt, for he was looking for his great reward. Moses is looking forward to something that is going to be greater than the wealth of Egypt. He's putting out a real Hebrews 11 faith vibe. He's actively engaging. So tonight I want us to look at two key things that Moses has done. We're going to look at Exodus 3 and we're going to look at Exodus 33 and 34. But through all of that, I want you to notice two things for this faithful relationship with God. One is you got to talk to God. You can't have a relationship without communication. And the second is that seeking solitude becomes something really, really important when we engage in the presence of God. So we're going to look at Exodus 3. And before we get to Exodus 3:5, I want to go back to Exodus 2, and I'm just going to tell you real quick what happens. So in Exodus 2:11 through 15, we see that Moses himself sees the injustice that the Israelites are going through. He sees that the Egyptians are oppressing them. There is a tussle, and Moses decides to take matters into his own hands and murders an Egyptian. Pharaoh heard about it, and now Pharaoh wants to kill Moses. So Moses has to flee, and he runs away to Midian. And he marries, he becomes a father, and now he's a shepherd working in a field for his father-in-law. So in Exodus 3:2, he's going to lead his flock to the western side of the mountain of God, and there he's going to see a fire in the midst of a bush. So Moses is going to be like, I wonder what is this thing? And instead of walking away, he goes towards it. So he leads his flock over to see what exactly is going on. And God calls to him from the bush. He says, Moses, Moses. And like talking to bushes are pretty common things. Moses is going to literally answer, here I am. And so in Exodus 3:5, we see that God is going to say, do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And when Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. So God is going to tell him after this that he sees the affliction of his people. He sees the affliction of the Israelites. He's heard their cry and he knows their suffering. And in Exodus 10, God is going to say, now go, for I'm sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people out of Israel. We all know this story, right? But Moses is talking to a burning bush, and he is going to ask this really good question. He's going to say, who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? It's as if he's saying, hello, do you see me? I'm over here. I literally am hiding from Egypt. I ran away to Midian so I don't have to go back there. Who am I? But the God from the Bible, he is gonna give answers sometimes that aren't going to be a response to the question that's been asked. And I love what God says, because if I called my mom, or if you asked your mom and told her that you were feeling inadequate, that you felt like you couldn't do something, what's her response going to be? Of course you can. You're wonderful. You're special. You can do it. She's going to list all these reasons that you're perfectly capable of handling the situation. But God does not say that. He doesn't say, oh, Moses, you're special. You can do it. You see a shepherd, but I'm seeing a savior of the Israelites. That's not what he says at all. God doesn't assure Moses anything about Moses. God's going to say, oh, wait, there it is. Sorry, I pressed it twice. But Moses protested to God, who am I to appear? Oh, I already read that. Never mind. Sorry. God's going to say, so I'm just going to tell you because it's not on the board. He's going to be with you. God says, Moses says, who am I? God's reply literally is, I'm with you. I'm going with you. So God says that the most important thing about you is that I'll go with you. And so Moses says, if I go to these people of Israel and say, hey, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, they're going to ask what his name is. So what do I say? And Exodus 14 says, God says to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent you. God goes on to tell him that he's going to need to gather the elders, that he tells him that the Israelites are going to listen to him and that the people are going to follow him. That's all the things that he tells him. So God's ready to make Moses into this eloquent, effective speaker to his people. He tells Moses the Israelites are going to listen, but Moses has a few reasons why this won't work. In Exodus 4, Moses is going to say, they're not going to believe me. They're not going to listen to me. They'll just say that what I said didn't happen. And in Exodus 4:10, Moses says, he pleads with the Lord, oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I've never been, and I'm not now, even though you have spoken to me. I get tongue-tied, and my words get tangled. Then the Lord asked Moses, who makes a person's mouth? So Moses lists all these reasons. I'm not a good speaker. I'm not now. I'm not going to be in the future. I never have been. I get tongue-tied. I can't do this. And God's response is, oh, okay. Oh, you're not good at speaking? Who made your mouth? That's like the best answer ever. You can't do it, but I can. So here's what I love about this story, because what we see here is the beginning of a relationship. What we see here is that you can start to see Moses is not going to mince his words. He's not going to hide behind like nice to-dos. He's not going to make you feel real good inside. He's going to tell you exactly how he feels. He's going to come and he's going to bring to God what he thinks. But God honors that. And so what I want you to get from this is that doubt doesn't make you unfaithful. That doesn't mean you're unfaithful. Asking questions engages your faith. It grows you. It makes you stronger. When you're thinking about things, you're reading the Bible, you're going out and being a light among the world, like it's okay to bring your doubts to God. That doesn't mean that you're not a good Christian. It doesn't mean that you're not a faithful person. What it means is that you're starting to engage with your faith. You're starting to grow and mature. For Moses to become this leader of the Israelites, he has to ask God, who am I? And he also has to ask God, who is God? And we see this beginning stages of this developing relationship here. So Moses, he may not have thought that he had the gift of speaking. He clearly didn't. It's very clear, very obvious. But the power in Moses' words weren't coming from him to begin with. The power in Moses' words are coming from God. And we really have to be careful and not limit God with our perceived abilities. Don't think that because maybe we're uncomfortable or we've never done something before or we kind of don't even really want to do it, that God can't use us to do what he wants to do. So we're going to jump forward just a smidge to Exodus 33 and 34. And here we see kind of this result of after many years that now we're going to see a little bit of Moses' flourishing relationship with God. So Exodus 33, 7 through 9, it was Moses' practice to take the tent of meeting and set it up some distance from the camp. Everyone who wanted to make a request of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent of meeting, all the people would get up and stand in the entrances of their own tents. They would all watch Moses until he disappeared inside. And as he went into the tent, the pillar of a cloud would come down and hover at its entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. So the Lord is going to speak with Moses. But that's not all it says. Inside the tent of meeting, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. So it's not just it's a friendship. It's a lot more than a relationship with like a teacher-student kind of deal, okay? This is saying that he speaks to a friend. That's incredible. I think that this is a good goal to have, to be able to speak with God like you do a friend. There's something else in these verses, though, that allowed for this to happen. It's that Moses would remove himself from everyone else. Moses sought solitude with God. Solitude is going to be this practice of consciously pulling away from everything else in our lives, including the company of other people, for the purpose of giving our full and undivided attention to God. Solitude, though, does not require silence, for those of you that like to talk. That's not what it means. We are going to experience the absence of distraction so we can more fully experience the presence of God. So, maybe it's right here. Yes. Sorry, these may be out of order, I'm not for sure. But okay, I'm going to look at Exodus 33. And Moses is going to say in verses 14, yes, right here. Okay, so, and he said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And Moses, that's what God is saying to him. He's saying, my presence is going to go with you. I'm going to go with you. But Moses is then going to go on to say that if you don't go with us, don't send us. Like, it's either you or nothing. And so God is going to say, this very thing that you have spoken, I will do. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. And Moses is then going to say, show me your glory. And because of this relationship with God, because he's worked towards getting to know God, he's done what he said, he's been faithful, he's removed himself, he sought God. Because of all of this, now Moses is going to get to see the glory of God. And so we're seeing this product of the time that Moses spends with God. We're seeing the relationship, the way that Moses speaks to God. Moses is still honestly telling God how he feels. He's honestly asking questions. And because of that relationship, he's going to get to see the glory of God. So the other side of this is God has things to say about Moses. And not just that they're going to speak to each other as friends. So in Numbers 12, Aaron and Miriam are criticizing Moses. That's his brother and his sister. And they want to know why Moses is being this special leader when God is going to speak to everybody. He's spoken to Aaron. He's spoken to Miriam. What makes Moses so special? And that's a really tough question to ask God because it does not go well. So in Numbers 12, they said, has the Lord only spoken through Moses? Hasn't he spoken through us too? But the Lord heard them. Now Moses was very humble, more humble than any other person on earth. And so what happens is God is going to immediately call Moses and Aaron and Miriam, and he's going to ask them to come to the tabernacle. And when they get there, this happens. So verses 6 through 8. Now listen to what I say. If there were prophets among you, I, the Lord, would reveal myself in visions. I would speak to them in dreams, but not with my servant Moses. Of all my house, he is the one I trust. I speak to him face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. He sees the Lord as he is. And that is God speaking to Aaron and Miriam about what he feels about Moses. He is the one I trust. He sees the Lord as he is. Those are some really powerful words. And so God is saying that he doesn't need to communicate in visions and dreams with Moses. He can speak to him plainly. And Moses understands. And all of that requires this obedient faith, this action faith. The last thing I want to look at tonight is Deuteronomy 34, 10 through 12. It's at the end of Moses' life. And it's a nice little recap of all these radical actions that Moses had. So there's never been another prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. The Lord sent him to perform all the miraculous signs and wonders in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land. With mighty power, Moses performed terrifying acts in the sight of all of Israel. And so for someone who started out in Exodus 3, who wanted to know who in the world he was, why is he chosen? Why? Why me? I'm hiding from Egypt. To at the end of his life being said that he has mighty power and he performed terrifying acts in the sight of all of Israel. It's pretty incredible. Moses is not perfect, okay? He's human. He definitely made mistakes. He also brought God his doubts and his questions. And from Exodus 3 onward, we find him genuinely engaging with God. Moses needed to know who he was. He needed to know who God was. And so often we're going to allow our self-doubt to paralyze us. We begin to start listing off all of these ways that we're not good enough, right? To do what God's asked us to do. We sometimes want like a sweet, self-adoring answer. Oh, you can do it. You've got it. We want someone who's going to build us up and tell us why we would be the perfect person to the task, leaving out God completely. But to have Hebrews 11 faith, the kind of faith that Moses is commended for, we need to recognize that the most important thing about us is that God is with us. And that takes all the pressure off. We are who we are because we have faith in God. And what matters most is the strength of what we're going to be holding on to tightly. To experience and live in God's presence, we have to shut out the world every once in a while so that we can hear God's voice. Strength is born in solitude. Decisions that change the course of your life usually come out of these holy encounters. You're not going to build a relationship on one-way speeches. That's not how that works. The more time you spend with Christ, the more you begin to act like him. So to experience and live in God's presence, we have to shut out the world so that we can hear God's voice. Oh, and there's the same one twice. Yeah. So The two things that we need for a faithful relationship with God is we've got to talk to God. You've got to. And you've got to seek solitude. There's this story that I read about a missionary who was, he traveled to another country. And he was so excited to be there and to teach about God. So during their worship service, he's sitting in the back and he's waiting for his turn to speak. And everyone is singing and praising, and it's beautiful, and it's in their own language. And he's hit with a serious case of doubt and inadequacy all of a sudden. He starts second-guessing all of these decisions that he's made that have led him to where he is right now. His heart starts racing, and he becomes paralyzed with fear. He doesn't think that what he has to say to this church is even important. It's not even worth their time. He does not want to go speak anymore. So he sits down and he prays. And he's not praying his worries. And this is why I love this story so much. He's not listing his inadequacies to God. He begins praying all the powerful and mighty things that God has done. He starts praying who God is. And he just starts listing them off. And when we realize that our strength and our abilities come from this God, all of a sudden we can take a step forward because it's not in us. It's with God. So he starts praying to the almighty creator of heaven and earth, the beginning and the end, the one who breathed life into Adam's lungs, the life giver, the mountain mover, the God that parts seas and crushes snakes, the God who raises armies from dry bones, a God who heals the sick, he raises the dead, he makes the sun rise and the sun set, he restores nations, he fights for us. He's always faithful. He sent his son to die on the cross so that we can commune with him and have the promise of eternal life. He's conquered death. And when you start listing all of the things that God is, here's what you find at the end of that exercise. The goodness, the greatness, the graciousness of God supersedes anything you could ever be. It brings a perspective to our own lives. And it's a good reminder of who our faith is in, of the strength that we're holding on to. Then we can step into his story. And by faith, we get to live. So tonight we're going to do just that. Okay? Tonight we're going to practice solitude with God. And we're going to go through these two questions. Well, not we. You're going to be alone. So you're going to go through them with God. Who am I? And who is God? And that's how we're going to start living by faith. Because we have to know who he is. Because he's with us.